Good afternoon and welcome to the 8th session of the Sunoikisis Digital Cultural Heritage 2017 fall semester. This week we're talking about linking text and image, and the session is being run by Simona Stoyanova from the University of London and Charlotte Roueché from King's College London, and I'll be talking for a very, very short time as well about this. Simona, of course, has been involved with Sunoikisis for a long time and has presented numerous times. I think this might be Charlotte's first time on Sunoikisis, but she's probably known to most of us for her work in digital classics going back many years. So yeah, we're extremely happy to have both of them here, as always. I think Simona is going to start off giving us a quick overview of the session. I'll hand over to you.
Hello, good afternoon. So very quickly, today we're going to explore some of the reasons for researching text and image together, starting with the fact that texts are generally written on something, so on three-dimensional objects. And then we're going to talk about why we tend to produce editions that have images as well as text and various possibilities of linking them, etc. And we are going to demonstrate a couple of tools for linking image annotation and text annotation. And Charlotte and Gabby are going to talk about digital editions, about what is a photograph, what is a text, why do we care about both, etc. So now I am handing off to Gabby again to start us off.
Great, thanks. Okay, so yeah, I'm really just going to talk for a few seconds, well, a couple of minutes. I just want to show some images of things that we might call texts. And just to get us started, really exploring what we mean by text when we say this. As Simona said, texts are written on objects by default. But when we say text, are we talking about the object? Are we talking about the ink on the object or the engraving on the object? Are we talking about the conceptual language expression that is attached to this object? Or are we talking about something which is beyond the object at all? As in, the text of Homer, which is not doesn't exist on a single object, but or does exist on many objects, but the text itself is at a higher level than that. So one of the things, if I say to you as a classicist or as a humanities scholar, what is a text? One of the things you might picture when I ask you to imagine a text would be something like what we're seeing on the screen here, this papyrus with some writing on it. It's text. Very clearly, we've got the original ancient handwriting of a 2,000 or so year old author in front of us. It's a text, but it's also an object, right? I mean, it's more or less two-dimensional. If you look at an edition of this papyrus, it'll have two dimensions. It'll say height and width. It'll seldom say the thickness of it, but it does have thickness. The papyrus has holes in it. The papyrus has grain. The papyrus has curvature. All of those things are things that can help us or hinder us from reading and interpreting the context of it. Slightly more obviously, but staying with papyrology for a moment and staying with Greco-Roman Egypt, another text that might appear in a papyrological corpus could be an ostracon, like the following. It's still writing on a more or less two-dimensional surface, but it's on a much more obviously three-dimensional object. It's an object that had a history external to and prior to being written on this pot shard, was presumably part of a pot before the pot broke and eventually someone took a shard of it and wrote on it. So it's not only has physicality, but it has a history that's related to that's prior to its being a text. An inscription like this one has various different physical features to it that are valuable to us. The text is the writing that's written on, in this case, 3 sides of this 4-sided inscription, but there are various features of its material, of how readable it is, of where the object is now, what the object means and meant in its monumental context, as well as simply reading it as a language expression. Another inscription, I pull this one up because it's both a text and an image at the same time, and of course it's an image in the sense that we've got a photograph of these hieroglyphics, but the hieroglyphics are themselves images. Some of the images in this writing system have phonetic values of the kind we're used to, but some also have ideographic values where the image, what it's an image of, is meaningful to the reading of the text. So that's another level of blurring of the boundary between text and image, text and object. This is also a text. This is not a primary text object in the way that the inscriptions and papyri are, but this is an early edition of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. The book itself, is a historical object and is also part of the context of reading this as a text. It's illustrated, it has quality to the paper, there are font issues to it, there's potentially damage to it. This particular copy can be identified as belonging to a particular library. All sorts of various historical things we can say about it as a text, but of course the text of Frankenstein as itself, as a whole, in the abstract, or the texts of Frankenstein, are something that exist in many more places than just this one physical copy. This next image is also a text. This is a text of an ebook. So this particular piece of text is not on paper. It's not on, one might say it's not on a physical support at all, though it is, because it's on some sort of magnetic medium that's preserving it in the form of digital bytes, and that is able to be represented as a string of text. So there is still some level of physicality to this, however abstract and electronic it is. Here is another ebook, but this is an electronic an online webcomic. So it's a text because it has writing in it, although some comics don't have writing in it at all. The communication is all through images. The relation between text and image is there. It's slightly different from the relation between text and image in hieroglyphic writing, but it's nevertheless the images have meaning, and they have transformation and movement and progression and narrative embedded in them. And again, this is something which exists online. This is not an online representation of a print book. It's an online representation that was never a book. It was online from the start. Although it has now, since I made this slide, it has been turned into a book, and you can now buy it on paper as well. And my last example, this is a text. It's abstract. It has never been printed. Well, it probably has been printed because it's a fairly iconic text, and there may well be people who've printed this out and put this on the walls of their office because it's been talked about a lot. In the 4 years since it was written, but this is a tweet. It's less than 140 characters long. It has a physical medium only in the sense that the ebook did, in that it's recorded saved on various people's servers and various computer screens, but it's not a printed book. It's not an inscription. The physical metadata, if you like, for this text is a very different kind of thing than we've talked about in some of the material texts that we focus on as classicists. So I just wanted to throw up those few examples just to give us some food for thought. When we say we're connecting text to objects and texts to images, what do we mean by text in the first place? And I think it's not a straightforward simple answer to that. So I just wanted to throw that up. I'll hand over to Charlotte, I think, next. Yep.
Right. It's a real treat to be here. Am I sharing my screen? Yes.
Not yet.
Now I am. How's that?
Yes, see it.
Good. I'm thrilled to be involved in Sunoikisis. I think it's a great honor because I think this is such a terrific program, and I hope you're all enjoying it, and I hope you will continue to benefit from it. I wanted to pick up precisely where Gabby stopped, which is that an inscription, and my involvement has been with inscriptions principally, is a thing. It's a thing in a place before you start piecing out the letters. And it may just be a thing in a place which only has one letter on it. Is that an inscription? And what drew me into the digital world was precisely the complexity of balancing out the objectness and the textiness of a thing like this. This is a letter from the Emperor Hadrian. I don't suppose the original letter looked anything like this, but it's a thing that has to be washed and dug up, prepared, looked after, and which will, for most of the inscriptions that we know, remain scattered out across the face of the world. Only a very small proportion of inscriptions get gathered up and taken into museums where they can be studied as easily as papyri, for example, nice portable papyri. The way we have thought about inscriptions, I want to insist on the experience of actually discovery and recording, because that has very much influenced the way that we think about these things. In the 18th century, by the 18th century, people are extremely keen to know more about the antiquities of the Middle East, to which it was difficult to get. Anywhere beyond Italy was challenging. And in Italy and east of Italy, they would send out artists to draw what they saw. And as you can see, their drawings are themselves extremely elegant. They're aesthetic objects, but it's important to remember quite how exciting this image is going to be when you have no other way of having images of Palmyra. This is what there is. There aren't any other images except the drawings that people bring back to you of a place which you know you will never be able to get to unless you're very rich. The impact of this is reflected in this painting by Gavin Hamilton of Dawkins, who is the man who paid for the trip, and Robert Wood, who was the man who did the drawings. And there in the background, you can see Palmyra appearing behind a palm tree, and there they are discovering them. But the significance of that discovery is not that they discovered Palmyra because people knew it was there. It was that they recorded and brought back the message of Palmyra. On their way to, I've gone one too far. On their way to Palmyra, they traveled through and they stopped at Aphrodisias, which is why it interests me because that's the site where I've worked. And Robert Wood, the man who did those drawings of Palmyra, recorded inscriptions there that he saw lying about. And as you can see, he focused texts. There is no indication of the, there's very little indication of what's there. He does say by a gate, so that, and another one on a gate, but that's about as far as it goes, the contextual information. Well, something to remember about Wood is that he was keeping his drawing paper for the drawings at Palmyra. You can't suddenly find paper in the middle of 18th century Turkey. He made the original copies in the margins of the copy of Homer that he was carrying. So there are endless, from the very beginning, there are restrictions on what's possible, which we tend to forget. This man, John Deering, a little later on, was another draftsman. And as you can see, like Wood, he was perfectly capable of representing architectural features. But when he recorded the inscriptions, all he recorded was the text. He did replicate the layout, as Wood had done, but there is no indication of what the support is like. Here, a little later, Pacho in Cyrenaica in the 1820s, is making some attempt in some of these cases to replicate the object. Yeah, but an awful lot of these inscriptions were in fact carved on walls, so there wasn't very much to say. But you can see he's trying to give you some idea of the support. But by the later 19th century, people are being sent out traveling with the specific purpose of copying inscriptions, where those earlier travelers were basically interested in monuments and picking up inscriptions as a side interest. And indeed, the Austrian Academy produced notebooks like the one you can see here, where they actually were pre-printed with the kinds of information that should be added to make the inscription useful. So you must remember to say where you found it, what the material is, the height, the width, the depth, the height of the letters. So metadata is being added to inscriptions, to the recording of inscriptions. And as you can see in this picture, he's actually recorded the profile of the object on which it's cut. So slightly more information is appearing. Let me just see, actually, there's one other image I want to show you. Kubitschek, this man, did rather quick and ugly reproductions of texts. This man who was traveling with him took much more care, as you can see, over drawing the text itself. The interesting thing is that this man who took care over drawing copied exactly half as many inscriptions as this man who did a quick and dirty job. If you've traveled a very, very long way to a very difficult place, is it better to copy more things or to copy fewer things more carefully? Assuming that in either case, you assume nobody will ever see this stuff again. That's a really difficult challenge for these people. One of the crucial pieces of technology was the development of the squeeze. And in many places, such as Afghanistan, where this comes from, a squeeze will turn out to be the only surviving record of an inscription which has since been lost. Squeezes were originally used for recording hieroglyphics because they were really difficult to draw. But they were very extensively used throughout the 19th and 20th centuries, and they are a wonderful record of something which, as I say, you may never see again. Museums and universities throughout the world have huge collections of squeezes, and they remain very useful. They're not necessarily easy. That's a picture of someone taking a squeeze in the 1920s. As you can see, an awful lot of people are involved, and putting that ladder on a cart is pretty scary. Because epigraphy, the recording of these materials is simply not easy. What rather pushes squeezes aside, or rather makes them less immediate, is the arrival of photography. Firstly, on the major archaeological sites, and then by the 1920s, people start going out into the countryside. So the man you just saw taking a squeeze in 1926 was also taking photographs. It's worth noting that he commented, having traveled in the area before simply recording things in his notebook, he commented on how much slower it was when you were taking photographs, which sounds odd to us, but it's a reminder about the early days of photography. And from then on, photographing becomes the obvious thing to do. The challenge is that you've then got to, how do you disseminate the photographs. And book publication turns out to be a very expensive way of disseminating photographs. So this has gradually become a greater and greater and greater problem, and it's part of what moved us into digital publication for the inscriptions of Aphrodisias. Publishers don't get very excited when you say, I've got 1,500 inscriptions and I've got 3 photographs of each one. So that got us into this kind of publication, very much driven by volume and the wish to publish all the information that we had. The notebooks, the context, the details. And so that was the initial pull towards online publication. But we were simply thinking about the images as records. We didn't think about more, and we were still working very much in the tradition which had been set 200 years earlier by those people drawing at Palmyra. Now, Simona will be able to show you some of the more interesting things that people are now doing with images.
Thank
Simona,
you.
over to you.
Thank you. So let me screen share. So just to quickly say that the tools I'm going to talk about, all of them are linked from the wiki page. And I'm going to spend a few minutes just very quickly demonstrating the first 3 of them. And the ones after those, I'll just describe very quickly. But all of them would be important for the exercise. So only 3 of those will be demonstrated today. The first one is the Proceeds editor, which is web-based, and it allows you to do a number of things with texts, transcribe texts, do morphosyntactic annotation, and the thing that we care about today is annotate both image and text together. So you can log in using a number of possible credentials. I'm going to use my Google login. You don't need to download anything, it's all web-based. Can anybody let me know if I need to enlarge my screen, or is this relatively visible?
Might not hurt to make it a tiny bit bigger. Yeah, perfect.
Okay, great, thank you. So you can align translations, import annotations that you've done before, and all sorts of things. So if we go to new transcription, there's a number of projects we can select from, and the one that I'm going to show you today, and the one that I advise you to use if you decide to use the Proceeds as one of your exercises, is to go to Epidoc Training from the list of projects. From those, you'll see that you have a number of eagle inscriptions. They're actually from Tripolitania. Just pick one, doesn't matter which one, and go to Create Edition. Let's see if I've selected an inscription with actual text on it. So it tells me my publication was created successfully. Then I need to go down to the edit part of my screen. And you can see that I can see a thumbnail of my image over there. And then I have an XML editing interface to transcribe my inscription as well. Now, if you click on the image, you can see it enlarged. You can enlarge it even more if that's useful. And what this tool allows you to do, it's called the Image Annotation tool. And it was developed by the Homer Multitext project and then reused and further developed by the Perseus project, is that now that I can see my image and I am fairly confident that I can read something on it, I can pick one of those 3 colors on the screen. Let's go with the yellow for the beginning. And then, come on. And then we are supposed to be able to draw a box. Oh, there you go. Oh, I think that's happening because of the zoom on my screen. So if I just zoom out briefly, I think that can go better. No, apparently not.
Press command 0 to go back to your default zoom.
Yes, I did. But for some reason in this inscription, it doesn't allow me to draw the box exactly where I want it.
How strange.
This is strange. Well, okay, that should do it. Okay, let me zoom in again. Okay, so I have drawn a box around one word that I think I can read. If it so happens that you have overlapping words or a symbol that you would like to transcribe as well, then you can use one of the other colors so that you can distinguish between your boxes. And the thing that's happened when I drew my box is that here at the top I've got a number 1, which means I've got 1 annotation. And if I click on this number 1, I can transcribe what I see, or I can transcribe what I can read. Then in the black box over here, down here, you see that I have an XML element, W, which contains a number of things, and just to make it a bit more visible, I'm going to paste it down into the XML editor because the black box is a bit tiny. So I have this element which identifies my image, so I have a URL of my image, and on top of that I have the coordinates of my annotation on this image. So the fax attribute, sorry, I don't know why I jumped. The facsimile attribute gives me an identifier of this exact section of interest on my inscription. So that then when I paste it down in my XML and continue editing, etc., I will then be able to look at both of them in my edition. To be able to look at the link, I need to save my publication. I'll zoom out for a moment to make things a bit easier. And then I will go to preview rather than edit mode. And if you click on the word that you annotated and wait for a bit, you get the section of interest on your inscription, as well as an overview of your entire inscription and a yellow box around this particular word. So you can see the bit that you annotated. If that was a long text, it would be more exciting. So when you click on your word on the transcription, you see that bit of the text, and also you can see where exactly on the entire inscription it appears. So that's quite handy. Once you've done all this, you can download a copy. And what you get is where is it? What you get is an XML file which records this link that you've made between the two annotations, the textual one and the image one. While this is opening up, there is another way to download what you've done with a bit more metadata. And that happens if you go to your home page to look at your dashboard with all of your various annotations that you've made. You can see on the right-hand side of each annotation, there's a little bag. And that, if you download this bag of data, that gives you a bit more information. So this is the kind of XML file that you get when you download from the page of the actual inscription that you've annotated. So you get the title with the URL, that the languages are English and Greek and all sorts of things. And then you have your transcription with the coordinates of your image. Okay. However, the slight difference from when you download from the bag of data over here is that with the bag of data, you get, I can't really enlarge my, well, I can. You get all sorts of information. In the data, you have, again, the XML file of your text annotated both image and in text, and, for example, a JSON file which tells you who created that, when, which schema does the XML conform to, all sorts of things that you might want to preserve for your project. So that's quite handy. The second project that I wanted to very briefly show, because you've already been trained to use it during this semester, is the Recogito editing platform. So basically, I'm just going to show an image. You can do this with text as well, as you know, but let's say I want to annotate an image on a map. And I'm going to the Black Sea, for example. Need to rotate the map to see what's going on. And let's zoom in for a bit. Okay, I see something I can identify. So I draw a rectangle. Come on, draw a rectangle around it. Okay, a point, doesn't matter. So I can say that this says Sidopoli on the map, but then I want to geo-resolve it. So to do this, I'm going to use the current name of the place in our case, and the ancient place, the ancient name for this is Apollonia Pontica. We have a gazetteer that records it. And then I've geo-resolved and annotated it. And then if I want to look at it on a map, this is my single annotation. You can export, again, the data in various formats, in CSV, in JSON, in RDF, two versions of RDF, or in GeoJSON. So that's quite handy. The CSV is really, really useful if you want to do other things with your data. So that's the sort of stuff you can do in Recogito, as you know. The third thing I wanted to talk about in a bit more detail is the Archetype Infrastructure, which is a bundle of web-based tools for the study of paleography, all kinds of paleography. It started with medieval handwriting, but it's developed quite a lot in the last years. And the bundle includes an annotator, a text editor, plus an image annotator, search and indexing tools, and an entire content management system. So there's, as you'll see when you look at the website, there's robust documentation. This is a tool that you do need to download if you want to use it. But the download process takes about 10 minutes. It's very well documented for all kinds of operating systems, so it shouldn't be too difficult to do that on your own if you wanted to try it. There's a description of what it does. It works with iconography as well as with written text, and I'm quickly going to show you what you can actually do with it. So this is, when you install Archetype, this is the out-of-the-box website that you will end up with. You have a couple of links and things, and currently there is one manuscript page which you can look at and see how the process is done. So I can already see that this manuscript has its name over there. If I had a number of them, they would be all in thumbnails, and I can see that it has 9 annotations and 1 hand. If I click on the image, I go to the image annotation part, where I can see what's going on. I can already see there are a few boxes where people have annotated something. I can zoom in as much as my image would allow. You can create an editorial annotation. I need to zoom out to be able to see the entire menu, or you can draw an annotation and annotate one of your letters. So let's do that. So let's say that I want to draw an annotation around that U. I will zoom in a bit. Okay. So I want to annotate this letter form. I've drawn an annotation on it. We have only 1 hand in this manuscript, so we say this is the main hand. I need to open my boxes on click. So then I click on it, and then from the drop-down menu, I have a list of predefined categories of letter forms and scripts and shapes that I can choose from to annotate my text. So I'm going to go down to a U, and then I'm going to save my annotation. Okay. If I click on the S, we can see that we have a bit more information about the S. Again, the components are things that we have predefined depending on what type of material or collection we're working on. So if I wanted to annotate the S, I could say that it's, well, every S is curved, I guess. That the upper curve is, let's say, at minimum height, for example. And then I save my annotation. I can save it from here as well, or I can delete it, or I can add it to a collection of S's, for example, etc. And once it's annotated properly, it goes green. So there are a few color codes and things that let you know what's actually happened and to what stage of the annotation process you've got to in your work. Now these annotations we can look at separately, character by character, once we've done them, to compare them, which is the really useful bit. So you have more or less the same kind of A, but not exactly the same one. One is annotated. You can also include punctuation, or, as I said in the beginning, decoration. In this manuscript, we have only 1 hand, and if we want to look at the texts, we go to the text editing bit of Archetype, where we can see the image at the top. We can zoom in as much as we like, well, as much as our image will allow, depending on resolution. And then on the left-hand side, we have the transcription. On the right-hand side, we have the translation. And we can work on those if we like. So how does those categories of letter forms appear? Where do we put them? So this is just the front end, the website that you do the annotations on and that you might eventually want to publish and make available for other people. If we go back to the home page, at the very bottom of it, well, you need to log in, but as I said, you need to install Archetype to begin with, and that goes with the login. It's all explained in the documentation. So at the very top of your home page, there's this database button, which leads you to this side, which is the back end. And you can see on the left-hand side are all the various things you can manipulate, the image, and then I need to zoom out here just to make things visible. So here will be the list of your images with thumbnails that you can hover over to get a better idea of what they are. You have the texts, transcription and translation, whether they are live or draft. So if they are live, they will appear on your website. If they're draft, they wouldn't, etc. You have the various items, so historical item, a current item, and an item part. That's the data structure of Archetype, meaning a historical item is the original ideal version of your text, be it an inscription that was broken into two parts. One is missing, and two are in different museums, and the historical item would be the original one, the complete one, when it was produced. The item parts would be the various items that existed, and the current items would be the ones that we can actually see now in a repository. And this is how Archetype allows us to work with our complicated and messy materials. In the hand part, we can list our hands and scribes if there's more than one. And under symbol, we have our list. I can zoom in now a bit. We have our list of ontographs and various characters, and allographs. So we're going back to the question of various scripts that were used. So the same letter in a different script would have a different description. So this is how we define these things in these lists in the back end of Archetype. And in descriptor, we have the various components and features of a letter form, ascenders and strokes, downstrokes and hooks and all kinds of things. And we have then the linking between a component and a feature. So an abbreviation stroke could look in various ways depending on the alphabet, the tradition of inscribing, and the script. So if we care about the various types of abbreviation strokes, then we need to list all of these features, but hook them all to the one component which we call abbreviation stroke. So this allows you to be very concrete and consistent with what you call your paleographical features, which is not always the case in publication. And if we change one of these, if we add a new one, and then go back to the website and refresh, then we'll be able to see the new one over here. But the really useful bit is that once you've done all this, you can search and compare and really in a very sort of quantifiable and really consistent and rigorous way look at your various letter forms. So that's one really useful tool that I'm partial to because I'm using it for my PhD. So moving on quickly to the several other projects that I'm just showing rather than talking about them in any length. One is the Chinese text project, which has a number of very interesting things. It acts as an ancient Chinese text database, but also has a dictionary, and words list and parallel and text reuse information and all sorts of cool things. But what they do with images is that if so this is a crowdsourced project that allows users to go in and edit and transcribe text which has been OCR'd. So to correct mistakes in the OCR and edit and transcribe in an online editing interface. And as many of you would know, some Chinese characters are not in Unicode yet and maybe wouldn't be anytime soon. So when a user comes across a symbol which isn't in Unicode, they can, again, similarly to Archetype, they can draw a box around that symbol, and then appears a pop-up box where they can put information about the composition of the symbol, how many strokes, what are the various components, where it is used. Example usage is very important, again, for comparison reasons and for tracking the usage of symbols, and also for eventually producing an application to Unicode saying, okay, this is used so many times that we do actually need a code for this, etc. So the way this project uses images and linking image and text is to define a new symbol that has appeared in a text, a new symbol which is not yet in Unicode, describe it as much as possible, compare it to other annotations of the same symbol if it has appeared before and other users have transcribed it as well. And then each symbol gets a unique identifier, so it can be referenced and searched within the database as well. And there's also an XML representation of the symbols. You can put it in your transcription. Another project is TextGrid, which is a big, massive German project that contains all sorts of things for editing, publishing, and searching and researching various things in all kinds of texts. But they one part of their big framework is the text image link editor, which is XML based. This is just a page of their documentation. It's XML based. It looks like this. So again, you can see the image, you can zoom in and out, and at the bottom half of the screen you have the XML editor. So similarly to other things we've already looked at, you can draw a box or a series of boxes around the bit that's of interest to you, and then I can't make the image any bigger, but basically this bit of the image gets an ID, which then you can put in your XML and continue editing like that. Another project is the text image linking environment, coming from the Maryland Institute of Technologies in the Humanities. And similarly to the TextGrid one, it is XML based and arranged in a slightly different way. But again, you can see your image. There are a number of various boxes and things you can draw, boxes and lines depending on what actually you want to annotate, and then you have the transcription. You can give things labels for searching and sorting purposes, and it exports the data in TEI and in JSON. Another tool coming from University of Victoria is the image markup tool, again XML based, so there's a theme to those. Because people transcribing texts tend to do it in TEI, especially humanities texts, so it kind of makes sense to have them integrated somewhat into the XML. So similarly to other projects that we have seen, this is a brief orientation page from their website. There are various controls you can see on the right. You can edit various bits of the XML. You can manipulate the image. You can add a new annotation to the image, create a new category. So all sorts of things that enable you to work with your images as well. And the annotations that you can do are things like categories and descriptions, graphical components. There's also a box for free text if you want to describe your object in more than just one word in your list of terminology. And each annotation also has an ID. So again, it can be referenced, pointed to, added in a publication, and put into an XML file that contains your transcription. The last tool I wanted to show you is Annotation, which is a JavaScript image annotation library. And they have a few demos. It looks slightly less complex than our text image linking editors. So there's our image. And we have a hint over here that tells us click and drag to annotate. So I want to annotate the peak, add a comment, and I can say that's a peak. I can annotate this bit and say that that's a roof. Obviously, you can do more exciting things than this, but just for the demonstration, you can edit something that's already been annotated or delete, and when you hover over a box, you see the annotation. And this, you can link the source files of Annotation into an existing HTML page. So if you have a website with images that you would like to have annotated in some fashion, you could just plug this into your HTML page, and then you would have an interactive drawing and commenting tool, which would look kind of like this. So these were the several things I wanted to show you. Emphasis again only on 3 of them. And now I'm handing back to Charlotte. Let me stop screen sharing.
Right, am I screen sharing? Yes, no. Am I audible?
You are audible, but you're not screen sharing yet.
Oh, you're not audible anymore, Charlotte.
You've muted yourself again. No, you're still muted.
Yeah.
Ah, there you are. Good.
No, am I audible?
You are now, yeah, you're back.
Good, good, good. We've just seen a lot of images, and we've also learnt today about a film which is in production, out of which one of the actors is going to be removed and replaced with another actor. I think it is quite important to remember because photography arrived before the internet, images are a dominant area, a dominant thing in the internet. And yet, what would the internet be like if we had not yet invented photography? It would be lots of drawings, I suppose. But it is useful to be reminded of the instability and unreliability of photography. Photographs can lie, and that makes the possibility of annotating images all the more useful. But I think it's useful to go on thinking about what all these images do to the way we think. At the moment, I'm involved with various people, and many other people are involved as well, in trying to respond to the crises in the cultural heritage crises in the Middle East, and trying to work out what it is we can usefully do. And a lot of that work is focusing on images. The EAMENA project is endangered archaeology in the Middle East and North Africa, is collecting and posting photographs of sites to record as much information as we possibly can about places which we may never see in there as they were, rather like that squeeze of an inscription from Afghanistan, which we may not see again.
You know you're not screen sharing yet, right?
Oh, no, I don't know. I'm not screen sharing.
Okay.
Right. That would explain it. Hang on. Let me screen share. Screen share. Right. How's that? Yes. Right. Okay, fine. I'm back.
Yes.
And present. Sorry about that. Just to go back in all of that, I just wanted to show you the EAMENA project, which I was mentioning. Another one which was put up, on which they started work before the crises, was this very, very useful collection of images of places in the Middle East, which has acquired a historical record function, because there again is our friend Palmyra, before the recent challenges. We're collecting material for a gazetteer of Libya. But at this point, you start to ask, what are the dangers of sharing this kind of information? Do you actually attract unwanted attention towards these antiquities? Why was there so much focus by ISIS on Palmyra? Because it's so well known. It has so much impact. So I think there's a lot of thought about what we're doing when we make all this information available. Another project is going to make available as reference collections of images of artifacts, so that the customs police who are trying to monitor smuggled artifacts can identify what they're looking at. But again, you may be helping the customs officer, or you may be helping the forger, who has a better image from which to work. How does one balance those different kinds of games? Are images very intrusive things in some ways? So it is worth thinking about the downside of such things. The other question, and another aspect of images, is perhaps presented by this. When I'm teaching about Justinian, I'd very much like to use this image. It's beautifully photographed and nice and clear. But its origin raises questions. It's come from a sale catalogue, and you can buy it for only $635. I take that dot to be, yes, it's dollars. If I want to keep that image, I'd better download it, because it won't stay there forever. It'll only be there for as long as they're selling it. So firstly, this image is unstable and you can't rely on it always being there. But also, there are questions which one's always going to have to ask about the origins of this kind of material. Was it legally obtained? What is its and also, will it ever be possible to follow it up once it's been sold, to go and check whether the image actually represents a real object? Or is all of this some great fantasy construct? So I think that there are some difficult questions which images present. And I think when we're annotating, it's important to think about all of that, as well as the wonderful powers that we're given to transcribe. So looking at the time, I shall stop there, and I'll hand back to Gabby.
You can have another 5 minutes if you need them, Charlotte. That's fine.
Oh, right. Well, to fill you, I thought we were running out of time.
No, that's fine. Go ahead.
Well, what I wanted people to be thinking about is how much power images are giving us, and how much power they give to us as scholars. They enable us to look, for example, at that lettering in ways that this image is better than looking at the coin itself in many ways. You can see more detail. Otherwise, you'd need a very, very detailed microscope to get all the detail that this gives us. Images are giving us a huge amount of power. They're also offering us an astonishing amount of record of material, an astonishing range of, if you go and look at the Eagle collection of inscriptions, we have records of our material of a range and fullness and richness that we haven't had before. And all of that is really very exciting. And if you go back to Dar al-Athar, for example, Manar al-Athar, they have collected, they're providing a very, very rich resource for people who are teaching as well as studying monuments of the Middle East. Hugely valuable. But images, firstly, the fact that they communicate with such ease is in some ways something we have to be careful about. Image is something that everybody thinks they understand. But in a way, if you compare this image with the one that I showed you right at the beginning, which was that very artistic shot of Palmyra with some beautiful, elegant stones tossed about in it, the 1750 drawing of Palmyra. And this one, which is now presumably a historical record, because the ruins are no longer looking quite like this. We need all these annotation tools more than ever. We need an immense amount of care when we deal with images. We know that images can be manipulated for political purposes. A very small example was a successful English politician who was supposed to be opening a hospital or visiting a hospital, and he was late. So he then had his image dropped into a photograph of the hospital opening. What was interesting was that that had no bad effects on his career whatsoever. He's continued to be a very successful politician. It's always left me with a funny feeling. But I think we need to be very cautious about allowing images more validity than they may really have. And that's where I think annotation tools can help us to alert users. This image is only what it is. It's no more, no less. It is this particular thing. And I think we need to think more and more carefully about the function of such images in our study. And so that's just a series of kind of cautions that I think it will be useful to think about as more and more images become available. Right, I think that's my message. Gabby, back to you.
Thanks, Charlotte. Great. Yeah, I just wanted to end up with again a very short few words, which actually follows on very well. You've led in very well to what I want to talk about, which is what we mean when we say an edition. Earlier I said what do we mean by text, but when we're talking about producing an edition of a text, here's an inscription. Well, in fact, it's not. This is a photograph of an inscription. The photograph is already an intellectual object, right? It's been created by a photographer. It's been developed. It's been adapted for publication. It may have been cropped before it was printed in a book. It was certainly cropped before it was resized and uploaded in this PowerPoint presentation. So there has been, I mean, it may have been manipulated to increase the contrast and the legibility of the letters on the stone, for example. And we don't know that it hasn't also been manipulated to falsify something, as Charlotte says. But it is in any case a photograph. Even if it is a completely faithful photograph that has, in good faith, been treated very honestly and very properly, there are still issues such as the history of photographic film, which is developed to be able to capture certain kinds of shades more than others. So there's all sorts of complexities in the background of that. So this simple photograph is already, we should say, is already an edition of the stone. Right? We've made a choice as to what to present as part of the text, as part of the image. If we have this image here, you can see this is even more obviously an intellectual intervention on the stone. It is, on the one hand, it's a reconstruction of the statue base with its original statue atop it. But even just looking at the text has been drawn in such a way that the letters, while they represent the shapes on the stone reasonably well, they're letters that have been drawn in such a way as to be legible. There has been some interpretation has gone on into how you draw that tau or that epsilon on the first line to make it clear that that we are drawing a tau and an epsilon. So this is at one step further removed, an edition of the text, even more so than the photograph was. And we can carry on in that direction. We can have a diplomatic transcription where this shows us in uppercase letters, but in regularized letters in a font on our computer or on a print page, showing exactly what letters we read on there. This no longer preserves the letter forms, it no longer preserves the shape of the monument or the layout of the text, but it still gives us a fairly unadulterated, unedited representation of the letters as they appear in the inscription. Another addition, this is a slightly more common addition that you might see, is where the abbreviations have been expanded, lacunae have been restored, words have been written in mixed lower and upper case, the Greek letters have been given their familiar diacritics. It's been written in such a way as to be able to read this. This is what we would normally think of as, the edited text. Unambiguously. The point I wanted to make is that the three previous versions are also edited texts. They're edited maybe to a lesser degree, with lesser intervention, but they're still editorial interventions. And we can have texts, of course, that are more edited than this version. We can have various different kinds in there. So I've gone in this very brief overview from photograph to drawing to diplomatic transcription to editorial transcription, but you can move in both directions, right? You can imagine to get you closer to the stone, you could have a 3D scan of one kind or another, which gives you a 3D model, which could be manipulated, could be edited, could be printed. That would still be, I think it's obvious, an edited, an intervention in the stone. It still wouldn't be the stone itself. And at the other end, we can have, beyond the editorial transcription, we can have a more normalized transcription, we could have a translation, we could have various other kinds of text that give us more intervention into the into what's going on in the edition. But I'll stop there. As a sort of overview. I just wanted to throw that out as to make us think about what it is we're doing when we're creating a version of a text for consumption. I guess Simona, are you going to talk very briefly now about a possible about the exercise. Yeah.
Yes, I can do that. So, is this readable on the screen?
I think so. Maybe zoom a little bit more. Perfect.
Okay. So, for the exercise, try out at least 2 of the image annotation environments we've talked about. Maybe begin with at least 1 of the 3 that we showed in a bit more detail, but obviously look at the other ones, try them if you like, or something else that we didn't show that you've come across or use frequently. But in any case, pick at least 2 annotation environments, and in the first instance, look at what they allow you to do with images and what annotation possibilities they give, and keep an account of the different features that they allow you to annotate and research, and how that affects the research process, and the types of things you can say or write about images, and what ideas that reflects. The second part of the exercise is a bit more advanced, but it ties nicely to things that you've already studied this semester. So as you saw, most of those annotation environments allow exporting of data in at least 1 format. So again, your chosen environments that you're looking at for the first part of the exercise, investigate what types of data formats they allow you to export into, what actual data you get in the file at the other end, and what features are reflected in the data that you've exported, which would then lead you to the second bit, to the last bit of the exercise. Once you have this exported data, what things you could do with it with the new file format. Plug it into another software to extract a different kind of information from it, transform it into a different format to use in a different tool, etc. So have a look first at what are the differences between these environments, and second, when you export the data, what can you actually reuse it for?
Sorry, I'm still muted. Great, thanks, Simona. Okay, cool. Yeah. So that's yeah. I think that's a useful exercise. A comment to my students and students in Romania and the US and anywhere else in the world can ignore this part, but that we might focus more on the first part of the exercise, looking at and engaging with the various image annotation environments, because I know we talked last week in particular about transforming data and moving between data formats, but we wanted to do a little bit more work on that before we do any practical transformation. So we might save the second part of this week's exercise for after we've done a little bit more work on Python, but that may not be the case for anybody else. So that's just a comment for my students. We have a few minutes if anyone has anything they want to discuss or bring up or comment on each other's comments. We don't have anyone else in the Hangout today other than the 2 presenters and me, 3 presenters, I guess. And I don't see any comments on the YouTube page. If you are watching this on YouTube in real time, that is to say, if it is now 13 minutes past 5 and you're watching this on YouTube, there is a live chat window to the right of the video, and you're more than welcome to leave comments or questions in there, and we will be watching it, and we will attempt to answer them if you do so. That's relevant for future weeks as well. But did anybody want to make any final comments?
Gabby?
Yeah.
I was going to say that am I mute? Am I audible?
No, you're speaking, we can hear you. You're still screen sharing, but...
Gabby just showed us that image of the Palmatus statue with the drawing. Would you like to display that again?
Yeah, just a second.
The base with the statue on it. Because it's an interesting example of a wonderful image over there on the right, the drawing, entirely well assembled, but which none of us have ever seen. We found the statue and we found the base, And the drawing has recreated a monument, which in all probability is how it was, but we don't know. I mean, we've never seen it. And there's this interesting question of the witness, the contrast between a photograph. The photograph itself that you're looking at is of a situation which you will no longer see, because the upper part of that base was later moved to the museum and the lower part is still lying on the site. So images have been used to reassemble and to recreate our understanding of things in the past. And so that fits in very well with these questions of what is an image and what does it mean?
Right, and the fact that this is a drawing helps to communicate that, right? The fact that it's not a realistic drawing, it's not attempting to be as real as possible. It's not like Wood's drawings. Helps to communicate the fact that this is not meant to be something real, right? This is a reconstruction. This links things. It would have been possible to make this drawing, almost photorealistic as a drawing, or even to digitally manipulate the photographs, because we do have the statue or parts of the statue. We could digitally manipulate that onto a photograph of the base and mislead the viewer into thinking that the statue is still on the base entirely. And even if the photograph had a caption saying this is reconstructed, it would still potentially be slightly misleading.
Absolutely.
That's a way of doing that.
And the photograph that we're looking at, as I say, represents a reality which is no longer true.
Mm. And I don't remember if it's this photograph or if it's if it was one of the others, but that you told me that in fact the lower part of the base there down here may even be the lower part of a base of another statue base, because they put it on something so that it looked more or less realistic, but that may also be misleading in that they've reconstructed two objects which may never have originally been a single object,
and which have had which have had a history of its own. So it's really difficult to escape the power of an image. I think that's the thing we need to think about all the time.
Yeah. And this will become even more true in 2 or 3 weeks' time when we start doing 3D modeling and 3D reconstruction and visualization. That we will not be able to avoid falsifying the image, because we're creating 3D images of things which either are cleaned up from the original photographs or are things that never existed in the first place. And that's something we'll have to keep our eye on and think about how we communicate the layers of, because we're not lying any more than we're lying when we expand an abbreviation in an editorial edition, because the reader knows that we're expanding that abbreviation, because the reader knows what parentheses mean. So we have to make sure that we're being as clear as that, or that there are vocabularies for communicating what is real and what isn't in our visual editions as well.
And we need to establish principles of honesty which are relevant in a world of fake news. Actually, it's a whole way of thinking of visual and intellectual honesty, which we require we need to train people to be alert to all these kinds of things.
Yeah, absolutely. Academics know you can't make a statement without a footnote, but that's not something to which the rest of the world are necessarily so familiar. Newspapers can make statements without footnoting them, which some of us wish they wouldn't.
And modern media make footnoting possible in new ways.
Absolutely, yeah. And hopefully they would make it, unavoidable, obligatory. Given that it's so easy,
That is the hope, I think. That is very much the hope. And I think it's something we need to be thinking about all the time in our own the standards that we're setting in the work that we do.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things I really like about many of those tools that we showed, is that you cannot make a statement without showing where it came from, linking to an ID or to a list of vocabularies that you've set up, etc. You can't just say this looks like a 4th century alpha. You need to annotate every single bit of it to then link to a collection of alphas that could lead you to think that it might be a 4th century alpha, etc.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And it's that language of communication of how we express those references in as transparent a way as possible, not only to specialists who understand what we're doing, but to everyone. That's going to become increasingly important. Great. Well, thanks very much, both of you. I think that was a really exciting session. Next week, please join us for the next session, which will be on, you double checks, prosopography and linked person data. I should remember that as I'm speaking on that as well. Great. I'll see you all next week. Thanks a lot. Bye.
Thank you.